Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to Study Capital YouTube platform. My name is Atul Mishra and I'm your mentor for CUET PG 2025 MA English Entrance Examination. In our previous last two videos, we have already discussed the difference between modernism and postmodernism, uh, post-modern literature characteristics, and in this video, we are going to talk about postmodern literary characteristics. So, as we have already covered, the fragmentation and lack of meaning, lack of unity that was there in the 20th century was considered as tragic in the modern period, but in the postmodern period it is writers started celebrating this kind of writing. That means fragmentation is now celebrated. There is no objective meaning and it is celebrated. There is no unity and writers are trying to celebrate that as well. They are not looking for solution, rather they are enjoying the problem. If you have read Albert Camus and his text The Myth of Sisyphus, it talks about how the punishment turns out into a moment of celebration and he started enjoying it. There are multiple theatrical forms which we'll eventually cover in our upcoming videos, like theater of absurd, where you see absurdity is celebrated. Waiting for Godot is one such text which is a very good example of theater of absurd. It talks it's a play where no one comes, nothing happens, it's awful, a very famous line that is associated with Waiting for Godot. Now we are going to talk about postmodern literature. So there was fragmentation, so there is non-linear plot. Writers have talked about the fragmentation with the help of non-linear plot. There is also self-reflexivity. We talked about the concept of meta theater, about theater, drama about drama, play within play, how you break what you say the fourth wall. So in the postmodernism literature, it is self-reflective. There are multiple endings, because there is no one truth, there is there are multiple truths. So we'll try to find out how literature of the postmodern period depicts these things, yes. So postmodernism, actually, as a what you say, postmodern literature, postmodern period starts with 1950s, and again, like the way you had surrealism, Dadaism, lost generation and other movements in modernism, you also have so many movements in postmodern era as well, such as you think about 1950s, you can think about Beat Generation, you can think about confessional poetry, you can think about angry young men movement, you can think about kitchen sink drama, and the list goes on. There's 1917 Martian poets, and then obviously, because we are talking about postmodernism, so the new forms of awards, Nobel Award, especially of the postmodern writers, and Booker Award, and then there are many other writers who are the part of the world literature. Also, you read them in postmodern period. So in general, it is a very important period. Now you see that it actually considered as a reaction to the modernistic point of view, which we have already seen. So the importance that was given to the high art in modernism, in postmodernism we find there is a rejection of conventional forms of literature. So because it is experimental, we have seen the avant-garde movement in the modern period as well. So the experiment actually starts with the modern age, but we find it at its peak during the postmodern period. So there is no high art, like the way there is no fixed art. What we find in literature is, we cannot say that there is one art which is hegemonic, which is better than the other. That means the works of creativity are not more valuable or artistic than others. Some works, right? Some works are not given that much importance, and that's why idea of creating something aesthetically perfect was rejected, which was there in the modernism. You can create something perfect, but in the postmodernism there is nothing perfect, right? So the idea of creating something aesthetically perfect was rejected, and now authors will embrace what Derrida says, playfulness, right, in irreverent approach. Now how we'll remember the postmodernism, we need a context. There is a writer called Whittington who came up with the concept of language games. Like different games which have different rules, language also is based on context, right? The heresy of paraphrase, you might be aware about this term by Clint Brooks. Clean Brooks talks about that we cannot, what to say, paraphrase the poetry, because the meaning in poetry is contextual. How you associate it with the concept of language games by Whittington. Think about it, right? There is a very famous example about the same word, but there are multiple implications to that word. You think about when I say, when a bus conductor asks you to bring the change, you think about the coins, right? In that form you think about the change. But for example, if you meet, Mahatma Gandhi somewhere around you, and he says bring the change, the same word, the same phrase, but you think of it as bringing the change in society, that means you change the context and the meaning is different. Same goes with postmodernism. So in order to understand the postmodern literature, you need to understand the context behind it. Context is very important in postmodern literature, right? So that's one thing that you need to remember. Now there are philosophers and creatives who they begin to reject traditional idea in any form, right? So traditional idea of how work of art, that can be anything, be it poem, be it play, be it novel and films, they should be created. They have altered the ways it was used to be in the past. Now there is increasing industrialization, and these writers in the postmodernism will respond to the increasing industrialization of the world. They will rebel against the idea that their works had to be realistic. You think about the Victorian period, the literature was, dominated by the realistic portrayal, but there is no need for any realistic ideas, and they will experiment with new approaches. You can think about epic theater, theater of cruelty, theater of operist, the concept of magic realism, faction, and the many other characteristics which you can think about when you think about postmodernism, and you can think how they rebelled against the idea that work had to be, realistic. It starts with the 20th century onwards. Rene Magritte, a very important person in surrealism. Audre Lorde is another person, and you see, Andre Breton, Rene Magritte, their paintings, they talk about the new approaches in general. We have seen Virginia Woolf, the new form of stream of consciousness technique is also one such thing. So what we find in postmodernism, some things that are continuation of modernism. So you see, like we have structuralism and post-structuralism. Post-structuralism is not at all opposite to structuralism. Rather, there are certain gaps that we find in structuralism that post-structuralism fills, right? So like for example, Saussure said we can move from signifier to signified, and that is how we derive meaning. But there is a gap which Derrida addresses when he says no, that we only move from one signifier to another. There is a chain of signifier which he calls transcendental signifier, and there is no signified. That means we never reach to signified, we never reach to a one meaning. There are multiple meanings. So that means there is a continuation, and then there are gaps that are filled by post structuralism. Same goes with modern postmodernism as well. Some of the characteristics are already revolting, but there are some continuation as well. So like the fragmentation was there, so there was non-linearity. Few examples we find in the modern literature, but there are many text, abundance of text available in the postmodern period which talks about the temporal distortion. So we have seen, as Aristotle mentions, there should be proper beginning, proper middle, proper end. That means there is a linear fashion that was followed in the past, but with the introduction of stream of consciousness in the modern period, and especially after the absurdity that comes with the Second World War, this there is a temporal distortion. So you don't find linear fashion writing, but writers in the postmodern period like to distort the time structure of their narrative. So what they'll do, they'll go back and forth in time. You can think about a very important anti-war novel by Heller. There you find the same example. So this is one such element of postmodern writing. Remember, we have already discussed self-reflexivity, which is very important characteristic of postmodern literature. Then we have maximalism and minimalism. These are two very important characteristics of postmodern literature. What is maximalism? That means writing which is lengthy and often highly intricate. You think about French Lieutenant Woman. That text, when you read Aristotle, he talks about magnitude. He says it should not be so long, it should not be so less, it should be intermediate, so that people can read. Magnitude is a very important part in traditional literature, but postmodern literature, you find a lot of text, they are lengthy and also very intricate. We have lots of details given and it appears to be almost rambling in tone, so it also digresses into one another references as if the author cannot keep to the point because there is no center, right? There is no fixed meaning, so you find people are deviating. Now there's a term called intertextuality. This is associated with postmodern literature. Julia Kristeva talks about intertextuality. What does it mean? It means there are references to different texts. Every text is not complete. It is completed through references to the old writers. Like T.S. Eliot in Tradition and Individual Talent talks about historic sense and talks about the conformity between old and the new. We have already talked about T.S. Eliot's essay in one of our videos. You can go through our series of English literature that is available on our channel, and you can explore those videos. So we have also a playlist for the love of books, and there are multiple videos where we have talked about these things. Okay, so yes, moving ahead. So one is maximalism, another is minimalism. Now you see the lot of information, and at the same time so much that is author uses sparse, right? They give undetailed prose to describe events, so very little information is given to you. Now it is up to you to define meaning. This is also one such way the narrative progresses in the postmodern literature. Now the another term is hyper reality. Jean Baudrillard talks about three terms: simulacra, simulation, and hyper reality. We'll talk about these three terms in this video only, at the end of this video, so what is hyper reality. Hyper reality is a moment when you cannot differentiate between the reality and the fiction. You can think about an example of a camera photo, right? So you have a photo that you have taken from your phone, right? That photo is the first copy. Then you use Beauty Plus, then you use Snapchat, then you use Instagram filters, and how you reach to a point where you are unable to recognize yourself, right? So you move to a point where it is very difficult for you to differentiate between the reality and the fiction, and that moment is hyper reality. It is propelled by media. Baudrillard critique this idea. So we'll talk about it in a few minutes, about simulacra, simulation, and hyper reality. This is also a very good example. You can think about a text by Julian Barnes. Julian Barnes is a writer who was awarded with 2011 Man Booker Prize, The Sense of an Ending. You need to read about these writers. They're very important writers. And Julian Barnes has written a text called England, England. Right? Please read about it. It's a very good example of simulacrum. Right? So he imagined England in a theme park. So if you're aware about what is simulacrum, you'll get the context behind it. Right? Very important text. Okay. Now the next characteristic of postmodern literature is pastiche. We have already talked about it. What happens? You paste together elements of different genres. So novel, drama, poetry, they are merged together, and it is the line between these genres are blurred. So it is difficult to differentiate between the genres. So style, ideas, everything is mixed of different genres. For example, when you read a postmodern novel, it might use element of detective fiction. So you think that it is probably a detective novel, but there is fairy tale as well, there are gothic element as well. So you see different genres and their characteristics are merged together. What we say pastiche. Another term for that is faction. Faction, fact and fiction, they are merged together. Magic realism, which starts in the time frame of modernism, but we have so many writers in postmodern literature. Gabriel Marx is there. You see in postcolonial literature, in Indian writing, we have Salman Rushdie, we have Angela Carter, and there are many other writers who have used the concept of magic realism, where you have fiction as well as reality, imagination as well as reality merged together. Okay, now I'll talk about these three terms, as we have already discussed the differentiation between modernism and postmodernism. Now we reach to a point of three important terms: simulacra, simulation, and hyper reality. So Disneyland. Disneyland is a very good example of simulacra. What happens? Probably we have copies of things that do not exist in reality, and this is propelled by media, according to Baudrillard. So like we have comics, right? We have Disneyland. So it does not exist in reality, but we have copies of it. You see the picture of Disneyland in your school bags. You have many years, if you have a good childhood, you might be aware about all these things. So they do not exist in reality, but they exist in such a way that they overcome the reality. You see, there are phones and there are apps. Now they are not real, right? These apps are not real, but you find that they work in a way, there are imitation copies of those things that do not exist in reality. This is simulacra, and simulation is a process how it happens. And then hyper reality, which is a moment where it is difficult for you, it is impossible for you to differentiate between a reality and a fiction. So these three terms, I will explain it again. Baudrillard is talking about the postmodern culture, and he says postmodern surface culture is a simulacrum, copy of something that does not exist in reality. So he says it is a virtual, or what to say, fake reality simulated or induced by the media. Please remember two factors: ideological apparatus and media. Now there are two terms: repressive state apparatus and ideological state apparatus. We'll talk about new left Marxist writers, and then I'll introduce you with these two ideas: what is ideological state apparatus, what is repressive state apparatus. And Althusser is a person who coined this term. Now I'm asking you one question, you need to comment in which text he talks about these two concepts of RSA and ISA, repressive state operators and ideological state operators. He also talks about one kind of reading. There is one reading, what we say, contrapuntal reading, which Edward Said talks about in Culture and Imperialism, where he mentions that not only the point of view of colonizer, but point of view of colonized, those who are oppressed, is also important, and that is how we need to read a text. See, in a similar way, there is one way of reading a text given by Althusser. You need to comment on this video, and in upcoming videos we'll talk about it. Okay, moving ahead. So simulacrum is basically a fake reality, copies of things that do not exist in reality. Simulacrum is not merely an imitation, or what to say, duplication, but also a substitution of original by a simulated fake image. So it happens in two ways. Remember, first you create a fake copy, and then you substitute the fake copy with the real copy. So real copy is replaced with the fake copy, and this is how the culture of postmodernism works. So postmodern culture is a fake culture, is a culture of simulacrum, like the way England is created in Julian Barnes' text, the example that I have given you recently. Okay, so contemporary world is a simulacrum where reality has been replaced by false images. That means the Gulf War, remember a very famous quote: Gulf War did not take place. It is by Baudrillard. So what he's saying, he says the Gulf War that we know from newspapers and television reports has actually no connection with whatever happened in the real Iraq War. So there's a simulated, simulated image of Gulf War that has been created and separated, circulated through media, but in reality it did not exist. Gulf War did not take place. This is a very important quote from Baudrillard writing. Now that what you understand, that there are no originals, there are only copies. There is no territory, there are only maps. There is no reality, there is only simulation. Now I'm again asking one question. There is a concept which says map is not the territory. You need to comment on this video who came up with this concept of map is not the territory. And this is again related to postmodernism, how we move to post-colonial literature. This phrase that I am talking about, map is not the territory, is very important in that context. Okay, so three terms, simulacra, simulation, and hyperreality. Now moving ahead, like the way we have lost touch with the reality of our life, we have also moved away from the reality of goods or goods we consume. Now there are three different types of market capitalism, right? So we are living in a world which Frederick Jameson says late capitalism, right? This movement is time frame is a period of late capitalism. Now he talks about three different market time frames, and for him he says if the media form one driving force of the postmodern condition, similarly multinational capitalism and globalization is another. Now, in previous videos, I talked about Arjuna Pudurai's concept of 5 escapes. There is a concept of globalization that is also important. Globalization means globalization and localization. So global, how global things are coming to local places, and the same place locals are also reaching to the global places. You can think about the media, different companies in that context. So we see Frederick Jameson talked about modernism and postmodernism, referring to second and third phases of capitalism. So before that, during the Victorian, what is say 18th century and 19th century, we have market capitalism. That is probably not important for you, but when we enter into the modernism, the early 20th century, where we find the development of electrical and internal combustion motors, it witnessed what he says, monopoly capitalism and modernism. But in talks of postmodern era, there is consumer capitalism, and this is the time frame of late capitalistic idea. There are many other things which we can talk about, but I'll leave this because this is a video on YouTube and we cannot explain everything, but there's a lot that we can refer to it. Now, as I have mentioned in previous video where I talked about how you can compare modernism with the second wave of feminism, in the same way you can compare postmodernism through feminist left or post-colonial angle as well. So the third wave of feminism, what it says, it rejected the idea of the second wave of feminism. What happened in the second wave of feminism? It talks about unity. All over the world, women experience one thing, operation on the basis of gender. But third wave talks about inclusivity. There is gender is one such factor. There are many other factors: ethnicity, class, from the place from where you belong to. For example, the experience of a woman from rural area in India, her experiences are different from experiences of a white woman in America, right? So you understand that the magnitude, you understand the quality behind it. So so that means we need different forms of feminism. So we have operation based on class as well as gender, caste as well as gender. That's why we have Dalit criticism, we have black criticism, so we also have a concept of womanism, which is different from feminism. How it differs is another discussion that we can have. Alice Walker, Rebecca Walker, who coined the term third wave, and Alice Walker, who coined the term womanism. How womanism is different from third wave of feminism is a different discussion. But you see, third wave feminism talks about inclusivity, talks about individualism, reject unity, reject one meaning. They says there are multiple meanings. So second wave says there is only one meaning, that is the operation that women have faced on the basis of gender. But third wave says no, there are multiple meanings, not only gender, ethnicity, caste, class, and there are many other factors. So you see how feminism is also inclusive. Talking about the third wave feminism is also inclusive and talking about the multiple factors that are responsible for the exploitation of women. And same ways postmodernism also talks about multiple forms of meaning. So postmodernism actually meet here with the third wave of feminism. Okay, so what we see, that our identity and they are constructed. So like the way we have seen identity crisis concept in post-colonial literature. A lot of post-colonial literature actually emerged in the postmodern period. So we find our identities and constructed, transformed every moment in relation to social environment. That means there are multiple identities, there are diverse identities, there are multiple truths. There is no one truth, there is no one objective truth. Truth is subjective, morality is subjective. As this says, morality is a myth. What is moral for you may not be moral for me. You can apply this thing in the postmodern literature. So we have multiple truths, we have moral codes and views of reality. How you will represent it in literature? So if there is no single meaning, then you'll find writers talking about it through different perspectives. So you have text written from different perspectives. You have retellings of so many texts. There was one question from Margaret Atwood in your last examination, Hackseat, which is a retelling of The Tempest. So what's happening in the postmodern period? You see writers coming up with different retellings from different perspective. You read J.M. Coetzee. Again, I'm giving you a writer who wrote retelling of Robinson Crusoe with a title called Foe. Very interesting text. But there is another text that he has written. You need to find out the text, and you see the postmodern characteristic of a novel. So it's not a retelling, but within this particular novel that I'm discussing here, you find there is a character who is an Australian author. This is happening within a text, right? You need to find out the name of the text. I am giving you the story. So in the novel, you see there is a writer, and she is an Australian writer. She writes a novel. Within the novel, you're reading a novel, and within it, the character is an Australian writer, and he's writing a novel which is a retelling of Ulysses from from a wife of Leopold Bloom's point of view. That means Mary Bloom. So Molly Bloom के point of view से retelling Ulysses की text के अंदर, which is again a post-modern novels. You don't see it in any other age. This is a typical example of post-modern writing. Coetzee's novel. You need to comment on this video which novel I am talking about. Okay, so yes, so that's the way writers are representing. You have multiple, as I've already mentioned, French Lieutenant Woman multiple times. There are many other novels where you find different multiple meanings, multiple point of view, and you also have retellings coming in the postmodern period. Now I'll just give you examples. There is fragmentation, there is deconstruction, there is playfulness, there is questionable narrator, what to say, unreliable narrator. Derrida will come up with the concept of play. Lyotard will talk about meta narratives. Postmodernism is an incredulity towards meta narrative. So postmodernism criticizes meta narratives, grand narratives. It talks about little narratives. Basically postmodern novels parody the concept of possibility of meaning, and you see we celebrate chance over craft, employ metafiction to undermine what we say univocation of the modern period. So we have pasties, we have multiple cultural elements, and then we have multiple form of theater which talks about this kind of narrative. So in our next video we'll talk about different types of theater emerged during the postmodern period. This is just an introduction. There are so many other characteristics of postmodern literature. I have tried my best to give you multiple examples from literature so that you understand that there are multiple implications that we can follow. You need to read extra. We are already running a batch for that. So yes. So you can use this coupon code ATULSIR30 to avail 30% off a special offer that is going on. Thank you so much. I hope you like the video. Please continue in this playlist and you'll find different videos about some important points, some important topics for your entrance examination. Thank you so much.